May 21st, 2025 Assembly Finance Committee meeting to order. Ms. Wendell, will you call roll or note roll?
Thank you, Chair Wall. We have all Assembly members present in chambers.
Brings us to approval of minutes, but we did not get the minutes in time, so we will move on to agenda topics. First agenda topic is set mill rate. So this would have been our final action on Wednesday, but we did not get there. So we are starting at a awkward time where we set mill rates. Staff or Ms. Fleck, is there anything you wanted to say before we have this conversation?
Thank you, Chair Wall. The only thing that I'll mention is I did include in the packet just some basic pieces of information that various assembly members had been asking through different channels. So I thought it would be easier to go ahead and just lay that out in kind of a memo format so you all had it at your fingertips. I guess the other thing I would say is if we just do the math, on the items that the Assembly has added that are recurring to the budget already, that would require a mill rate of 10.44, so an increase from the manager's proposed budget. So just wanted to say that out loud. And I think that is all that I have to share before you all start conversation. We're happy to answer questions.
Maybe you could break that down for us a little bit more of how that
Sure.
number, how we got from the manager's proposal to that number.
Absolutely, happy to do that. So through the incremental requests from the manager's budget, so things that were worthy of your consideration, but either from a timing perspective or from an increased service perspective, were not included in the manager's proposed budget. There was $130,000 added for restoring the library funding. There was about $86,000 added for supplies and services related to the communications division, adding to the manager's administration department. There's the $75,000 of the school district's additional outside the cap funding that was approved on the pending list. $71,000 related to our junk vehicle contract that came in after the manager's proposed budget was done. There was an FTE added to the law department for about $66,000. A park ranger FTE was increased from 0.5 to a full FTE. That's about $39,000. In the community grants process, the League of Women Voters has a $10,000 recurring appropriation. And then all of that's reduced by about $17,500 in net savings from taking care of the Fish Creek Road in-house versus paying ADOT to do that. So all of those add up to about $460,000 of increased expenses on a recurring basis, and that's equivalent to 0.07 mils. And then we've talked about some revenue risks that we're concerned about, that we have some indications, although aren't completely firm, that are at risk, and that's the secure rural schools for about $550,000. That's 0.08 mils. And then the community assistance program for $624,000, and that's about 0.1 mils. So in revenue, we're losing the equivalent of 0.18 mils. On the expenditure side, we've added 0.07. And so the combination of that takes you from the 10.19 to the 10.44.
Questions from the committee on all things mill rate? Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If we didn't increase the mill rate to include just one of those figures, like the secure rural schools, let's say that we did, that was a big one, $500,000, give or take. If we didn't get that, what would be the consequence to the school district Or would we just be required by law to come up with it out of general fund? Or could the service be cut, or would we just have to come up with the money some other way?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Bryson. Despite the name, Secure Rural Schools funding is largely used for streets-related projects and streets operations. So we would likely, if in the event that funding didn't come, we would come to you looking for general fund support for those programs or operations or service reductions.
I've got a question, and I realize this may take a little bit of calculation, so I apologize. I should have cut this earlier. You know, a while back, we asked kind of about, you know, what is the impact to the median home, homeowner, really just as a way of grasping what these changes actually mean. You've put together this helpful table, but it does. If median home value has decreased, so it becomes a little bit of a confusing look. Would you be able to tell us, and you may need a moment here, for the median home value, so for a $515,000, 500 valued house, what the change in their property taxes would be between 10.04 and 10.19? Because it will be an increase to folks, depending on what the value of their home did, and it would be helpful to know what that increase is. Does that question make sense?
Yes, if I could clarify the number. So you want to look at a median home value of $515,500 at 10.04 versus
What it was last year at 10.04, and what it is at what it was being proposed at 10.19, just to give us a sense of the scale.
Yes, give me just a moment. Chair Wall, it would be for the median home property this year, so the 515,000, you would be looking at a difference of an increase of $98.50 for the year, so just under $100. If the mill rate, changing the mill rate from 10.04 to 10.19.
Thank you. That's helpful to me. Any other questions? All right, I will ask the mayor to make us a motion to get us started.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move a mill rate of 10.19 and ask for unanimous consent, and I will speak to it if anybody objects.
Ms. Hughes Candies. I think she would like you to speak to your motion.
Yeah. No worries. So I'm accepting the manager's proposal, 10.19. People have watched me throughout the years. I tend to try and lower it, but this time I see that we just have some pressure on the budget that we haven't had in the past. Namely the 3 schools that we weren't planning on having, and that is, I think if people were listening, it was $450,000 just to operate, not even operate, to shelter Marie Drake. So we just have some pressure that we don't have. At the same time, I know that there's a 0.07 deficit with what we added, but I think that there are other ways to take care of that, including from general fund one time, but I also have some proposals which I will tell you about later that I intend to bring forward at the budget, but it's hard to do stuff at the spur of the moment, so I'll give you people time to think about it. And then we have 11.8 general fund balance. I know we have to care for collective bargaining, and we may have to care for some income loss, but at this time, the finance director said it's still unsure, looks likely, but might not be. So I don't think we should tax ourselves for something that we're not sure on, because we tend to tax ourselves, and then this assembly, for some reason, keeps getting manna from heaven. So that's why I'm going with the 10.19, realizing that next year we may have to move it back up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do think manna from heaven is nice, but I don't think it's a good budget strategy. And I don't think it's building a strategically balanced budget, according such as seen here. I appreciate everything you just said. I spent a lot of time today playing with a calculator, breaking apart those pieces that I think are trying to find the difference between the things that are truly unknowns at this point and things that we are known quantities because of actions we've taken earlier in this cycle. So because of that, in knowing that 10.44 mill rate is necessary if we want to pay for the budget and what we added and the loss of federal, while I will say that maybe one piece of that is more of an unknown, I would say however many I said, 3 out of 4 or 2 out of 3 of those are not unknowns, they are knowns. We decided to accept increments from the manager's office. We decided to add our own reoccurring costs during the pending list project. And we decided to backfill federal funds to keep our libraries open every day instead of letting them be closed. So for that reason, I think knowing that negotiations are still out there, if 10.44 is a more conservative covers what we added, then I feel like I would be more comfortable at that level.
Mr. Brayson, then Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've had the same worries that Ms. Hughes Candies had about all the different variables coming up in the next year. One of the things that we did to increase our manna from heaven is the marketplace facilitator rule that we just got corrected and just went into ordinance, passed it on Monday night. That is going to return higher revenue for the marketplace facilitator companies that are coming to town. I don't know if anybody's paid attention, but the community is not at the happiest with us right now. We went through the outburst flood in the lid process. We've had people complaining about the homelessness situation, and we have 2 active ballot initiatives out for signatures right now that that if passed would have a significant impact on our ability to balance our budget. We would not be able to do that. Keeping the mill rate at the 10.19, I think, is the most responsible course of action for us tonight. We raise it tonight while they're gathering signatures to lower our tax rate. We absolutely will be looking with, those guys will be victorious. They'll get their signatures. I don't think that we should do anything more to enrage the community while this is going on, nor do I believe that, I agree with Madam Mayor. One of the accusations from the community is that we're overtaxing or taxing without that directed expense to it. At 1019, we have a balanced budget from the mayor or from the manager, and I think this is something that the citizens can accept without getting even more irate with us. And that's going to be real important considering what we could be facing for these fall ballots. Thank you for the time.
Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will also object to keeping the mill rate at 10.19. I very much appreciate where the mayor is coming from, and
Oh, sorry, Was there an amendment made? I did not hear an amendment. I heard.
No, I objected, but it
Conversation.
might be easier for the purposes of this conversation because that was just, nope, that's my overlooking that. So I would move, I object for the purposes of an amendment, and I would move to amend the mill rate to 10.44. And I would ask unanimous consent.
Yes, Ms. Atkinson, you get privilege here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support moving the mill rate up to 10.44. You know, part of the reason that I think I moved to put money in the restricted budget reserve this year, part of the reason that we were so thoughtful when we were doing the community grant requests is that there is a lot of uncertainty right now, and I don't think that putting downward pressure on the mill rate and trying to make things work for 1 year is the best approach. I think that having a budget that we are safe in is most important right now because we really can't predict the future. And so I think this is the most responsible move we can have. Thank you.
Mr. Kelly, then Mr. Smith, then Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. I just object for the purposes of a question. And I might have missed this if you mentioned it before, but do you have figures for how much in general fund would make up the difference between the 10.44 and 10.19? If we decided to go with the mayor's proposal of 10.19, but if we were to take it from general fund, would we have an estimate of that, how much that would be?
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Through the chair, I can give you that number in just a moment. It would be $1,633,000. Sorry, can I try that again? $1,633,225.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll object to the amendment, and maybe the happy place is somewhere between them. There's definitely some risk. We also have to remember there is some possibility in the next year or so on revenue either by our own making or the state of Alaska. If we're not allowed to fund outside the cap, there we might have an issue. So anyway, so there's things that could happen. I guess for me, and we also know if we looking at our kind of these, sheets and balance sheets on the changes and the things that happen after we pass the budget and the ups and downs, like as try as we might and as good as staff is at trying to predict things, there's just changes that happen plus or minus a couple, sometimes millions of dollars that are completely out of our control. I feel like raising the mill rate by 0.4, which from what I can see would be one of the largest shifts in the past 20 years, is probably not the right strategy, nor do I believe it's like fully necessary, because I think we have some, again, opportunities to potentially we have some possibilities on the revenue side. So I'll oppose 10.44. Thank you.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. I'll keep mine brief because I've already stated why I like the other number better, and Mr. Bryson did a good job. But just remember that we also have an assembly goal that tries to keep the cost of living down, and I don't agree that 10.44 helps. Thanks.
I saw, I'll go with Mr. Steininger first, then I saw Mr. Kelly. Sorry, I just wanted to get the folks who hadn't spoken yet.
I guess I'll speak in opposition of the 10.44 and in favor of the 10.19. I think the comments I was going to make have been made much better by Mr. Smith and Mr. Bryson before me. I do think that there are other opportunities to address this, and I think in some ways the 10.44 is, or the 10.4 is more pessimistic about some of the upcoming revenue items than I think we maybe need to be. And when we talk about getting manna from heaven to balance our budget, That also, to an extent, implies that some of our previous tax rates may have been set a little more pessimistically than they necessarily needed to be. And, you know, by holding this at the 10.19, that does give us an opportunity to share a little bit of that manna from heaven with the taxpayer.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I think I'll oppose this. I think I'm somewhere in between. I think I might be willing to fund any of the incremental increases that we've made, perhaps by the mill rate, by mill rate increase, but I don't think I'm willing to go quite up to 10.44. I'll be looking for other ways to try and make up that difference for this year.
I'm gonna ask a question. Some assembly members may have more information on others. For staff, the two potential revenue losses that we introduced into this conversation last week. Can you give us, I think it was last week, was it 2 days ago? I don't know. Could you give us kind of an update on what we know today, how certain, uncertain we are? I know it's rapidly changing.
Thank you, Chair Wall. The update I can provide at this point is we know that the Secure Rural Schools passed one hurdle of many to be funded. So while it's making progress, it's not a done deal. Still has a long way to go through the federal process. We did reach out to a department at the state to talk about the community assistance and got a very vague, non-committal response, but it was more, the legislature has to do what they're doing. And so I know they signed out or gavelled out yesterday. I don't know that we have any further update from either the state or from AML on how that resolved.
All right. Anyone else? Ms. Hall.
I'm inclined to go with the 10.19 and regarding the Secure Rural Schools, I think the mere fact that it has the name rural in it is in its favor, and I expect that that will probably not be axed in the end.
I'm gonna speak my piece. I can see there, I think I've counted enough to know we don't have support for 10.44, but I would strongly recommend we choose a number higher than 10.19, given what we just added to the budget. As Ms. Hughes-Candy said, those are some knowns, and we know that we have revenue sources in trouble, amongst other things that we know are. Can you guys hear? I'm just gonna make sure my mic's working. Is that working? Okay. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to try and split a hair here to see if I can come up with a number that reflected a lot of our thoughts here. And I would make an amendment. I can't. We'd have to,
I think we have to vote on this, and then you could amend the original motion.
Chair.
Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll just speak briefly in wrapping up. I also can see that this does not have support from the body and that people are comfortable with a lower number. I will also advocate that I hope you can find a higher number than 10.19 when you make choices during a budget process to add things to the budget. And I say that because I do not think it is responsible to be in this position and to be using public funds and then counting on, and I don't mean that as an attack on anyone, but that just can't be our budgetary process, to hope that we're going to be saved by historically large, reserve fund and hoping things go our way. And I do think there are some things on the docket tonight that we've been talking about other revenue sources, which I think is a good thing. It can be hard sometimes living in this city and watching the legislature and not getting jaded or cynical, because I think we see at the federal level and at the state level, you can always kick things down to the level below you. And I will just remind us, we don't have that luxury, so the decisions we make now will just play out in assemblies of the future. So we may be feeling like, oh, our backs are not to the wall here, and that's a good thing, but when I came onto this assembly 7 years ago, we were well set up by assemblies of the past who had put us in a good financial position. I also just want to note, as you're thinking of other numbers and whether you could be comfortable going then 10.19, that we have 10 million that we're going to have to magic up somewhere for the utility. And then I will also just say that I feel like sometimes I'm the only one beating this drum, but the Juneau I know does say thank you to the assembly all the time. And of course, like every community, we are full of 32,000 different opinions, but I do not feel like the town is raging at me, even as I know there are people who are legitimately, they feel strongly that this body makes mistakes, and I'm sure we do. But in general, I think this is a community that loves its services, supports its local government, and I just don't want that to be lost when we're having these kinds of important financial decisions, because I want to say that government is a good thing, and I'm not trying to make it smaller at all times or assuming that the public is mad at us. So that's all.
We have a motion and we have an amendment. Ms. Wendell, will you call roll? And maybe clarify just so we all know what we're voting on.
Thank you, Chair Wall. We have an original motion to accept a mill rate of 10.19, and the amendment to that motion would change the mill rate from 10.19 to 10.44. Roll call on the amendment. Assemblymember Hughes Scandies.
Yes.
Assemblymember Smith.
No.
Assemblymember Kelly.
No.
Assemblymember Hall.
No.
Assemblymember Atkinson.
Yes.
Mayor Weldon. Assemblymember Bryson.
No.
Assemblymember Steininger.
No.
Chair Wall.
Yes.
Amendment fails, 3 ayes, 6 nays.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to propose an amendment to the motion using a mill rate of 10.24, which is splitting the difference of the 10.04 that we had last year to the 10.44 that technically could be required. I can find justification for going to 10.24 with it being right in the middle of the steps where we needed to go. It puts more than $325,000 back into our budget, which could cover some of that rural schools if that wasn't to happen. And I don't think it's a large enough increase to further agitate the citizens that are paying attention to the mill rate decision right now. Thank you for that.
Objections? Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I think I would at least like to cover the additional 0.07 in incremental recurring cost. So I think I'd be more in favor of something closer to 10.26. This comes close, but at this point, I think I'll object to 10.24.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was also kind of in the 10.26 realm, but it's 0.02. It's quite small, so I'm okay with. I'm okay. I mean, I don't want to say the word rounding error on the radio thing, but so I'll support Mr. Bryson's motion at 10.24. Thank you.
I'll support this motion, but only because it raises it from 10.19. I'm hoping that we can get to a balanced budget after this motion. With this, we have a motion, we have an amendment. Ms. Wendell, will you call roll?
I'll remove my objection.
Objections? All right, so now we have a motion that's been amended to 10.24. Do we have any objections? I'm going to try here, to make an amendment to get us to what takes care of what we as a body added to this budget, which would be 0.26. Point 10.26.
10.26. Okay, you've heard the amendment to change the mill rate to 10.26. Are there any objections? Mayor Weldon.
I appreciate what Ms. Wall is trying to do, but I like Mr. Bryson's compromise. And like I said, I think there's other ways we can come up with that 0.07.
Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will just support the motion. I think that if we add things to the budget, we should pay for it on an ongoing basis.
Mr. Smith.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just a reminder, 0.02 is about $131,000, so say a rounding error. And there are some things that, anyway, I'll go with a slightly lower number. I appreciate the attention, but there's a lot of things out of our control that are going to change it more than $131,000, so thanks.
Mr. Bryson.
One thing that I was really proud of how we've handled the budget over the years is that we methodically stepped down, took baby steps instead of giant leaps. There was a year that we could have gone lower on the mill rate and we didn't because we wanted to be really methodical. I picked a number that was smack dab in between where we were, where we needed to be. That's the kind of methodical thinking that next year when we're trying to set the mill rate, having those baby steps to get us where we need to be is going to be much more amenable to the community than the bigger leap. I know it doesn't seem like much, but 1024 is a smaller number than 1026, and I think that the community would appreciate that. Thank you for supporting the motion.
Anyone else have anything on this? I will just share my 2 cents very briefly and say that I appreciate Mr. Smith highlighting the $130,000 number because that is exactly how much the funding was to restore the library federal funding. And that to me could not be a more recurrent number, as I know I will fight for keeping the libraries open every day. So that to me is maybe more substantial of things that we've added back in versus things from the pending list. So for that, I will be supporting this amendment. Not seeing any other comments. We have amendment. We have an objection. Ms. Wendell, please call roll.
Thank you, Chair Hughes Scandies. On the amendment to change the mill rate from 10.24 to 10.26. Assemblymember Wall.
Yes.
Mayor Weldon. Assemblymember Smith.
No.
Assemblymember Steininger.
No.
Assemblymember Hall.
No.
Assemblymember Atkinson.
Yes.
Assemblymember Bryson.
No.
Assemblymember Kelly.
Yes.
Chair Hughes Scandies.
Yes.
Amendment fails, 4 ayes, 5 nays.
Great, that brings us back to the original motion. Any objections? Seeing none, that is so moved. That brings us to our final budget decisions. So this is the last moment we will be chatting about our budget in the AFC. And so our actions tonight will be moving, right now we'll be moving what we have done so far to the Assembly. We're going to take this by the three different mechanisms we have. We have a CIP resolution, a mill levy ordinance, and a CBJ budget ordinance. So Mayor, I'll ask you to move the first one here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move the CIP resolution to the full assembly with an amendment.
Would you like to speak to your, or introduce your amendment?
I would love to. This is just a clarification for staff and for some of us on the assembly. When we voted on the private dock passenger fee funding, some of us were unclear what we were voting on. Some of us thought we were, because it said FY26 on the top of the page, we thought we were doing it through the FY26, which would mean we would allow reimbursement for those monies up until June 30th, 2026. Others thought we were voting to end it in December 31st, 2025. So I am making a motion to hang on a second. So I would make a motion to fund that reimbursement through the second half of FY26. So it would end on June 30th, FY26.
Staff, oh, sorry.
But
I know there's some confused faces over there, so.
is that what you needed? I'm sorry.
So the amendment that you're making actually applies to the full budget, not to the CIP. So the funding of the private docks is part of the full budget. So that would be item number C.
I will wait till item number C and withdraw my motion this time. So sorry.
That was
That's what
my
happens when
fault.
The finance chair.
That was
and
my
the
fault.
Mayor get together.
Yeah, all right. Let's
I will-
try that again.
I will move the CIP resolution to the full assembly.
Any objections? Seeing none, that is so moved. Go ahead, Madam Mayor.
I will move the mill levy ordinance 2025-03 as amended, with the mill rate being 10.24 to the full assembly.
Any objections? So moved. Go ahead, Madam Mayor.
I would move the CBJ budget ordinance 2025-01 to the full assembly with an amendment. So if you didn't remember, and it's in your supplemental, your first page of your supplemental for those who aren't doing it. So my motion would be to fund the private dock receipts for the second half of FY26.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll object to that just because based on my understanding of what we were doing, it was to get through this calendar year, or this cruise ship season as we might think of it, and then starting next cruise ship season, be working with that. So I'll object.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess just one thing to point out is the values shown in the marine passenger fee budgets are for a full year. So that was, I think, my source of confusion, and that I saw these full year numbers, even though they were only for a calendar year. So anyway, so I'll support it. I thought with those numbers, we would allow for reimbursement. It's not just a grant. They have to actually spend the funds and then seek reimbursement. That I had been planning to do it for the full fiscal year. So I'll support the mayor's motion.
I'll speak. I'll be in opposition. Part of the conversation we had was about raising our own docks so that we could fund the same services with those dockage fees that we thought the private dock owners should be funding with their dockage fees. And so we will begin doing that for our own docks in this coming year. And so it makes sense that the private docks would also start using their fees to fund these things in the coming year. All right, we have a amendment. We have a motion and an amendment. Ms. Wendell, will you call roll?
Madam Chair, could we get it just repeated? So
Yes, Ms. Wendell, will you repeat?
Yes, the original motion is to move Budget Ordinance 2025-01 to the full assembly with an amendment, the amendment being to fund the private docks for the full fiscal year through June 30, 2026. Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Assemblymember Hughes Scandies.
No.
Assemblymember Atkinson.
No.
Assemblymember Bryson.
yes.
Assemblymember Hall.
Yes.
Assemblymember Smith.
Yes.
Assemblymember Steininger.
Yes.
Assemblymember Kelly.
No.
Chair Wall.
No.
Amendment passes, 5 ayes, 4 nays.
Ask a clarifying question. Does that mean that next year we will be, what happens to our docs for the funding of those services in the first half of the fiscal year? Sorry, first half of the calendar year as a result of that?
So, that the amendment doesn't change. Oh, no, I know what your question is. I'm sorry. Angie. Go ahead, Angie.
The budget numbers included full funding for the marine passenger fees for the private and the city-owned docks. The amendment, as just approved, directs staff to allow that funding to cover private docks through the whole year. We don't actually do an official MOA within ourselves, and the docks did not increase their own expenses for FY26 to account for the additional dock revenues. So I believe that we would, the funding's all there, that we would treat the private docks and the CBJ docks the same for the fiscal year.
All right, thank you. That brings us to seasonal sales tax. We haven't quite, sorry, we voted on the amendment. My bad, I got us out of order there. Brings us back to the original motion as amended. Any objections? Seeing none, that is so moved.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just to give everybody a heads up, I didn't want to do it tonight, but I'm looking at 2 potential cuts that will come, that I may make when it gets to the assembly. One is a cut to JEDC of $200,000, and another cut is to Jensen Olson Arboretum of $112,100. So just give everybody a heads up, and I'm sure we'll hear from lots of community members about those possible cuts.
Thank you for the heads up, Madam Mayor. I appreciate it. We appreciate it. All right, we're going to take a break since we just have one other hearty topic in front of us. I'm going to give us 15 minutes because I would like you to read the 2 proposals that are in your red folder before we begin. So take a break and make sure you have read these proposals if you haven't done so yet. So we'll come back at 6:30. us back on that note. That was probably on the record. Okay, seasonal sales tax. I, spent a little time thinking about how we could have this conversation because, it's hard. There's lots of different variables, and if we take it one issue by issue, maybe we come up with something that doesn't really add up. And so I appreciate Assembly members putting forward some proposals that make kind of coherent sense. So what I'd like to do is hear from the authors of the two proposals you have in front of you. Just kind of briefly why you chose what you did. If there are questions from the Assembly to the makers of those proposals, an opportunity to do that. And then what I'll be looking for is just a starting place from the Assembly. Which proposal would you like to start with? Just as a way to get us through some voting and some decision making, we'll kind of put a proposal on the floor to consider. See how that works. This won't be necessarily easy, but that's the best I came up with. So I'll go with the proposal that came to us first, the Hughes, Gandy, Smith, Steininger proposal. Whoever would like to speak.
All right, so the proposal that you have, it's got 4 different sections, and they're kind of organized from what seem like easiest decisions to kind of hardest decisions, not very scientifically, though, laid out in that manner. I'll note, even though each word recommend is bold and underlined, these are all things that we believe need to be discussed in the body. It's not a bold and underlined recommendation from the group, but we got together and tried to lay out, what do we think the key decision points are, and what do we think the most kind of logical path forward on each of those. So to walk through, of course, we have to define what seasons, and there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I think it's fairly obvious that doing it on the quarter when people have to, submit sales tax remittance to the city, that just makes the most sense. It's easiest to fit into our current systems. And of course, setting the seasons as winter and summer as the most kind of logical for what we're trying to accomplish here, which is, shifting tax burden between year-round residents and summer visitors. Second section is on implementation date. Again, pretty logical, wanting to implement on the start of a quarter. We had some discussion about it. There's that balance between giving the business community enough time to implement this, to change point of sale systems, know that this is coming, get into compliance, and then the balance of how you structure the start. And we landed on January 1st. Part of that is, that gives us then half of the fiscal year where the new kind of regime would be in place, and we'd have 1 quarter of low tax followed by 1 quarter of a increased summer tax that would kind of balance themselves out and kind of have the least impact on fiscal year 26 revenue. Whereas had we delayed another quarter, we'd be starting on the high tax quarter, which both would be kind of negative from the perspective of our year-round residents, not showing them the benefit of this new tax policy as quickly. We felt like January 1st, it gives that benefit to the residents much quicker than a further delayed implementation date. But, also curious for those with more experience, how that implementation, if there's hurdles that will be difficult to meet for January 1st. On the third, we looked at exemptions. This is again a little more complicated. We know that the current ballot initiative out there exempts food and residential utilities. We're also saying, food as an exemption that would show a lot of benefit to locals who, then would see a pretty significant benefit in removing a 5% sales tax on the food that they purchase right now. On utilities, it gets a little more complicated. Not all utilities, we don't know whether all utility providers are capable of differentiating between a residential and a commercial purchaser. And we don't know necessarily how difficult it would be for all those utility providers to make that differentiation. Because when you think about the utilities, this includes, of course, our city-owned water and wastewater, but it also includes private utilities, electric, heating oil. I believe wood pellets is in that number. I'm seeing a nod from Director Flick. So some of those get pretty complicated if you're trying to define between a residential and a commercial buyer. And so our recommendation is right now recommending that we would do all utilities, both public and private. And I believe the $5 million number that we've included includes both residential and commercial, simply from that perspective of the implementation challenge. But definitely something that is where it differs from the ballot initiative currently being looked at by the public. And so definitely a discussion point. And then on the tax rates, we sat down with Director Flick, and I'm hoping that at some point in this conversation, she can maybe share a screen with her model so we can see how these numbers actually impact collections. But we all know currently we have a 1% permanent tax, a 3% temporary, and a 1% temporary. The way we envisioned this as a group in our discussion was retaining the 1% temporary year-round sales tax. So there's always a 1% that the voters give input on a 5-year basis, can look at the projects, look at how that's being spent on the ballot and make that decision. But replacing the 1% permanent and 3% temporary with a permanent seasonal structure. And we felt like that kind of was the best balance between that continued voter input and a reliable underlying sales tax structure to base our finances on. The other piece, of course, is the rates themselves. We had a lot of discussion, ran a lot of different numbers, and the 3.5 in the winter, that's inclusive of the 1% temporary sales tax. So 3.5 to 7.5 in the summer. So swing of 4% between the two. But what that ends up doing, the end impact of that is about $26 million shift in revenue collection from year-round Juneau residents to summer visitors or summer residents that are here just during that time period. When you divide that out by the 32,000 people roughly in Juneau, you get about $800 in tax shift per resident. So every man, woman, and child, $800 less that they pay in sales tax a year, and really lays out that kind of benefit to the local of the seasonal visitors. We also included on here some comparators to other cities in Southeast Alaska, one of which has just a flat year-round sales tax, that's Hoonah, and then City of Ketchikan, Sitka, and Skagway. So you can kind of see how our consensus compares to those.
Thank you, Mr. Steininger. I was only laughing about babies paying taxes, so not at all of the other content that you provided. Questions for the proposers from the body. Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the 3 members of the body that put this together. Appreciate that. Looks like some good work. Talk to me a little bit about trash. Does that mean we're not paying trash sales tax on the trash collected at the curb, or when we go to the landfill? That seems to me a weird little spot.
Mayor, I'm looking at the other two, I might defer to Director Flick, because this is something when we talked about the different utilities, that is, some of the other ones we have a relationship where we can say, is it easy for you to collect this? Do you differentiate for this? But I don't think this touches on trash, and I could be wrong.
So I do believe that this would impact definitely your curbside pickup, so your residential pickup. Not, you have to figure out how that actually impacts somebody bringing trash to the dump. And so there's probably still a little haziness there.
I had Mr. Bryson and then Ms. Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a bigger swing between summer and winter than I'm comfortable with. Did anybody look into what the economic factors would be if you raise the cost of, you're only removing sales tax from non-prepared food? I would assume that we're going to use the SNAP definition, so that's non-prepared food and utilities, but you've raised the price of every single other thing that we purchase in Juneau during the summertime period. So do we have any economic information? Mr. Steiniger knows that it'll save everybody $800, but did we look at what summer spending is for Juneau families and what the impact would be on all of the other things that we purchased during the summer that would now have a significantly greater cost during the summer months than the winter months? How do we look at what that economic impact would be?
Do the proposers want to take a crack at that first, Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. From what I know of the model, we don't have that level of detail or analysis. I mean, I guess it's, you would pay on non-food and non-utility items, 2.5% more than you're paying today during the summer. But on those other significant parts of your, cost of living, there's no sales tax. And in the winter, your sales tax is down 1.5% again on those now taxable items. So, I mean, it's increasing the tax. It's increasing, it's going up by 2.5% on the tax, but the cost shift and then the per resident tax reduction, I think, so.
If it's a question, go ahead, Mr. Bryson.
Ms. Flick, how many businesses do we have in Juneau that are not grocery stores or utility providers? Because if only grocery stores and utility providers are the segments that are going to have the tax reduction during the summer, we should be able to find out how many other businesses would have their, do we know how many businesses in town that aren't grocery stores or utilities?
Mr. Bryson, that information could be attained. I do not have that data here tonight, but I can get that for you.
I think that would be helpful for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Hall.
This is just a clarification for Mrs. Director Flick on the dump run or the waste. Currently, do contractors that have a building permit pay sales tax when they go to the landfill?
Assemblymember Hall, I am not certain on that. I know that if somebody has a building permit, that their purchases with respect to that construction project are sales exempt, or sales tax exempt. The permit serves as that exemption card, if you will. I can't speak for certain how that applies to taking items to the dump, although Manager Kester may know.
I just pulling back up my email with building on this topic when it came up earlier in April, and we do not issue a card for demolition permits, and so that would lead me to believe that there's less exemption room for those dump runs when they're associated with construction, but we can get more detail.
Mr. Kelly, did I see your hand?
Yes, I was going to ask a clarifying question in response to Mr. Bryson's question, but I think I'll ask it offline.
Any other, Mr. Smith?
Thank you. I guess I'm not sure if it's said in here, but I think we're stating these numbers actually do generate a small surplus over calendar year 2024 sales tax revenue. I want to say it was about 2 million, 2.3, 2.5, with, you know, all inclusive of, and that's after, of course, the exemptions for food and both residential and commercial utilities, the ones, you know, listed here. So it does also generate a small surplus towards, we know we have increasing costs and risk and stuff. So just wanted to add that in. Thank you.
Great. Seeing no other questions, I will ask Mr. Kelly to speak to his proposal. And I know, Mr. Kelly, you put a few options here. It looks like you have a recommendation, so you're welcome to talk about how you got there, but maybe focusing on your recommendation if that's helpful.
Sure, and I think many of you have probably already caught it. I did mistranspose my notes slightly for options 2 and options 3. It is my intention that the higher sales tax would actually fall in the summer, and the lower sales tax would actually fall in the winter. Other than that, I think my proposal has a lot of similarities to the previous proposal. It was my goal to find something that had less of a swing than 4%. It was my goal because I tried to listen to basically what I heard from a lot of the assembly. I heard assembly members talking about wanting to actually not just compensate for the loss in sales tax that we would lose from exempting the utilities, but also bring in a surplus. And so I tried to look for options that would do that. I tried to look for something that had a smaller swing in response to other parts of that conversation. And I feel like I looked at at least 3 options with Director Flick when I came in Monday afternoon. My top 3 are kind of outlined here. The one that I feel is probably most similar to what is being proposed by Mr. Smith, Mr. Steininger, and Ms. Hughes-Gandes is the option number 3. It also brings in about 2.3 million in extra revenue after exempting utilities. It also maintains both the permanent sales tax and the 1% temporary sales tax. I did have a couple recommendations as far as ordinances that might come out of this, but I think I'm a little bit flexible. I was going to recommend that we forward my sales tax structure onto the full assembly for consideration. And the one I'm a little more flexible on is whether or not we introduce an ordinance with seasonal sales tax, forward an ordinance with the exemptions. I think that would potentially give the assembly a little more control over when that is instituted, but then we're also at that point gambling that our seasonal sales tax passes the voters and is paid for. So I'm ready to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Kelly? Mr. Bryson?
Not quite sure if it's for Mr. Kelly. Whichever proposal the group or the assembly decides on, that would still have to go to a community vote. Is that correct?
It's my understanding, Mr. Bryson, that is not entirely correct. The sales tax exemptions we're capable of doing on our own. That's what I gather from my conversation with Ms. Flick. So I might refer to her for confirmation.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. A change to the tax amount has to go to the voters. Exemptions can be adopted by the assembly via ordinance.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. I appreciate, Mr. Kelly, that you're, get this forward, even though it was a tough day today trying to get for it. So your food, I guess I'll just make it one question, but it's a two-part question. Is your food the SNAP food, and is your utilities the same as the other one, electric, heat, and oil, wood pellets, and trash?
Yes.
We had a quick question for staff just along the train of thought that Mr. Bryson was going down on this one, or not on this particular proposal, but some of the issues Mr. Kelly brought up. If we, want to put the idea of a seasonal sales tax and the exemptions that would be included to the voters, can that go as one question that says, here are all the things, here's the changes to our tax structure we want, yes or no, or do we have to break those questions or break those actions up in some way?
Thank you, Chair Wall. You can keep them together because they're both related directly to sales tax. You can keep them together because they're both directly related to sales tax.
Excellent. That's good news, I think. Mayor Weldon.
As a general question, did either of you, either of these things look at other sales tax exemptions, removing those, I guess? Let me word that differently. Did either of these ideas look at removing other sales tax exemptions to put money back in?
We did not spend time looking at other exemptions. This was just focused on this specifically.
Same answer.
I guess I just want to say, we actually talked about it, but I think we felt like to provide clarity to the voters, should it go forward, we didn't need to, muddy it with a bunch of changes, especially for exemptions, which in most cases we can just do via ordinance. So we just thought, try to keep it clean, as straightforward as it could be. Yep, thanks.
Great. I'm hearing a lot of similarities between these two proposals, except when we get down to the tax rates. And so maybe we can walk through the items that the Hughes, Gandy, Smith, and Steininger proposal started with as a group and see if people are on the same page about some of these, let's call them easier topics before getting to the tax rate. If that makes sense to people. So there's a recommendation here on the seasons. Maybe I can, curious if there's anyone in the assembly who has any issue with how this proposal is defining the seasons if we were to put forward a seasonal sales tax. Great. Check. Also a recommendation on implementation date. Any questions or objections to the recommendation on implementation date or thoughts, Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question for staff. Should the sales tax exemption on food and utilities, food and residential utilities, make it to the ballot, be affirmatively voted on by the voters in October, when would that take effect as written?
Assemblymember Smith, as I understand from the city attorney, it would take effect 30 days after the assembly ratified or certified the election results.
Okay, so November 20.
Mid-November.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mayor Weldon.
Unless we state in the bond or in the proposal that it's January 1st that it would start. Is that correct?
So Mayor Weldon, I understood Mr. Smith's question to be if the referendum that's out for signature right now were to be on the ballot and approved. I don't believe that it states an effective date.
Anyone have any objections to using January 1st as our working implementation date for this conversation? All right. Yep.
Thank you. I guess for me, I was kind of thinking, I was like, there is, should that ballot measure go into effect, whatever. I guess kind of looking at it and it really potentially only being, again, should we move forward with all these things? Should we say January 1? There would just be a little over a month of time where businesses aren't, anyway, that we're not accounting for the, with the seasonal sales tax, the loss of sales tax revenue from food and residential utilities. So, I mean, it's not nothing. It's also, say that number's 7 million a year or something. 1/11 of that is, $600,000. So it's not nothing, but I'm also not kind of thing. So it would have been nicer, I think, if the ballot measure it said a different date that's a little more easy to implement, because now they have to do it in a month, but I didn't write it, so.
Thanks for that. Okay. So moving on to exemptions, we have some recommendations about what to exempt in the proposal and how to define what those are. Are there any issues on the assembly with any of this, or areas you'd want to discuss? Mayor Weldon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would object to exempting food and your utilities without a mechanism to put the money back. So with this whole proposal, I don't object, but if we are just looking at exempting food and utilities with a $5 million budget or $6 million budget, I forget, I would object to it.
Thanks. I think you're probably not alone in that. Mr. Bryson, did you have a comment on what would be exempted? Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. I just want to make sure I understand the mayor. So you're saying that by itself you would object to this, but in the context of the entire proposal, you would be, okay, thank you.
Mr. Bryson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Here in sales tax, I was not excited to get to this discussion because I have two businesses that this will directly impact. But I understand that there is a way that the community can benefit from having a sales tax, a seasonal sales tax. We could take advantage of the increased summer traffic. So I was hoping that we'd be able to find a good compromise that doesn't have negative consequences. In theory, you're not doing anything to the business. You're just changing the tax rates. But raising the cost of goods for every business in the community that's not a grocery store or a utility provider during the summer months, there are things that Juneawites have to buy during the summer that aren't those. Back to school items that are not included in this. And so while it sounds great that it would have a really effective lowering of the cost of living, it would raise the cost of everything else that we buy in the community during that time period. That's the part that worries me, getting it passed by the voters. Find your favorite Chamber of Commerce people and tell them about this big a swing and see what their impression is. Get other opinions from the business community, what a big swing like that would be. I know that a 4% swing in my business, that's a big deal, a very big deal. And I get it. I'm trying to get on board with seasonal sales tax. The smaller the numbers from summer to winter, the more amenable it'll be to the businesses. If you give me a big swing, you're going to affect months in my year, and you're effectively making it cost more to do business in Juneau. So the cost of living savings that we're hoping to achieve by removing sales tax from goods, it would get passed on to all the other items that we buy here in the community. And I explained something real simple. let's use a sandwich shop in a town. If there's 3 of them, they did about $20,000 a week in sandwich sales. Oh no, there's only 2 sandwich shops. Still, they do about $20,000 in sales. Oh no, there's only 1 sandwich shop. It does roughly $20,000 in sales. The level is there. You change the sales tax, the same amount of money that can be applied towards those discretionaries does not change. That's where the cost, you'll be driving up the cost of living for everything else that we do if we allow a big swing like this. Thank you for the time.
Mr. Bryson, before you're leading us where we need to get here, but maybe I'll just make sure before we jump into that tax rate discussion, if there's any other comments on the particular exemptions. Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. And this is for the makers of either one. Again, are you looking at both residences and businesses or just residential?
Yeah, we included in ours both business and residential on the utilities, mostly from the implementation perspective. But also there's, by exempting business utilities, you're also providing a little bit of a benefit to those businesses that are, heating their business, getting power. It's small, but it's helpful.
And if a restaurant buys groceries for its restaurant, not included, included.
I'll just additionally say, I think Mr. Steinecker just talked to, the perceived benefit we saw of leaving them in it, the perceived benefit from implementation. But this is, an item that obviously if other members of the body have a real argument for why we would or would not, then we thought making it more expansive to start.
All right, I'm not hearing a lot of further comments on the exemptions, which brings us to tax rates. So this is, I'm glad we've got 2 proposals here because we do have, some difference here between a wider swing and less of a swing, and some difference in terms of the cost shift and the, revenue for the city and probably ability to pass. I mean, there's political differences between these and getting through to the voters. So maybe I'll just open it up to whoever on the assembly wants to speak, not avoiding the proposers for now since they've had a chance and hear where other people are at. I see Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do support the larger swing, the 3.5 and the 7.5. I understand where Mr. Bryson's coming from with concerns for businesses. I think this proposal balances it out pretty well because, as we said, we'd be exempting some sales taxes for businesses, and then also business owners are people that will be benefiting from the per resident tax reduction as well. I do hear about sales tax differences potentially modifying behavior, but I doubt that we will see that pan out much. We can't predict that, of course, and I don't think we have any data on what that will do. We can maybe look at other communities, but with any proposal like this, we won't be 100% sure how it will affect behavior of people who are purchasing things in the city and borough of Juneau, but I think we can be pretty sure that tourists will continue to spend money at that higher tax rate. So what I see here is the larger shift is a larger benefit to the citizens of Juneau who are also business owners. And I do think that this proposal sort of walks the line of getting a hefty cost shift onto tourists from our residents, and then also, caring for folks who might be affected by the increase in sales tax.
Ms. Hall.
I just looked up in Seattle, the sales tax is 10.35%, and that's a combination between the state and the city. So someone wanting to buy a bike out of state, by the time they pay shipping and a higher sales tax, I think they'll buy your bike, Mr. Bison.
Mayor Weldon.
Trying to give everybody else a chance at having to talk, but they're not raising their hand. So I have made it quite clear that I'm not wild about a seasonal sales tax, but I can read the tea leaves, and everybody is trying to figure out ways to generate revenue and take advantage of that. We have lots of extra friends in the summer. So with that, I like the recommendation of the little bit bigger swing in the sales tax, because I too have a business that increases in the summer, and the $815 per resident, Ms. Atkinson, does nothing to help that whatsoever, just so you know. But at the same time, if we're trying to get this past the voters, I think the 3.5% in the winter will help do that.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, ma'am. As we raise prices as business owners, we do it by the 2, 3, 4% because it makes that big a difference. It does. If this increases the cost of doing business in Juneau during the summer, and that means that a business that uses businesses that serve, like a business isn't a standalone island. One business has many things that service it, and if you raise the cost of every single one of those services, you get a greater increase in cost on that business. I know it sounds like little numbers, but these have huge ramifications, and I can absolutely see how a 3.5 and then next week is 7.5%, the difference that would make. Or right now it's 7.5%. I'm trying to finish the summer. I got a 7.5%, and in 3 weeks the tax rate goes down to 3.5%. You don't think that's going to wreck somebody's September in their business? While I understand the appreciation of trying to exempt food utilities, which why this body wants to give me an exemption on food sales tax, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you give any person in this room a sales tax exemption on food? If we're trying to help people, let's find the people that need that level of help. We're going to mess up the tax rate. We're going to make it complicated. We're going to make a burden on the local businesses, which account for 99% of the businesses that would be impacted. They won't get any exemptions. So I don't see how raising the cost for 99% of our businesses in our community doesn't have a negative consequence for the cost of living here in the community. And again, I don't think that I'm going to be alone when the business community hears of that big swing. In doing this process, we're trying to bring a product to the voters that they will approve. I would like to make a friendly suggestion that if it is a large gap, the larger the gap, the less likelihood it does not pass the voters. The better you bring the gap in line so that you're not harming the business community, will increase the likelihood that the voters will support that. If you have the whole business community screaming, don't do this to us, because 99% of the businesses will be negatively impacted, that's going to be harder to get past the voters. But if we bring something that's amenable to the business community, who are the people who are going to have to do the work to collect and remit this sales tax, something that they can live with, is going to make it easier to pass, and it's going to achieve the outcome that we're looking for, that more burden will be shared by the tourism. But if we go about this wrong, all this work will be for naught, won't get it passed. Thank you for that extended time, Madam Chair.
I'll go ahead and take a crack at it. I'm appreciative of everyone's perspectives. These are hard things to figure out, how the voters are going to vote and what people really want on these complicated issues that have trade-offs on either side. I am supportive of the Hughes, Candy, Smith, and Steininger proposal. I think because it is a simple message that we have heard from the voters again and again. We want a progressive tax structure where the things that we all pay for, food and groceries, and our utilities, are exempt. We want more benefit from visitors who are coming to our community. These taxes are not on our businesses, they're on the visitors who are coming. And it's comprehensive, and I think that clear messaging will be important to getting this through. So thanks for all the work on the proposal. I saw hands from some of the proposers, so if you all have things that you want to add, now's a good time. I think Mr. Smith, if you had something to add.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Someone brought up the issue with the food and about why to exempt all food. And I hear that argument. I mean, I've thought the same thing. Like, do I, or, you know, I mean, there are people, there's millionaires who live here. Like, should they not pay sales tax on food? The reason is the ability and the implementation of that at the store, and trying to do a means test, and oh, you get a card and then someone has to write the number down and they have to enter it to the, anyway, it's just, it's not perfect. I don't love it. It's just trying to do a means test on it would really get some businesses against it, because think of all the like burden and bureaucracy that they're now having to deal with. So it's a valid question. It's a valid principle, but in terms of the policy call, for me, it's just, it just makes it so much easier to implement. And yeah, I mean, yeah. So just a response to that statement. Thanks.
Ms. Hughes-Gandies and Mr. Steininger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will keep things relatively brief. I appreciate everyone's consideration of our proposal. I feel like for some of the decision points that we've landed on, some members have already said, but to talk on the actual numbers and the delta, the swing between them, I do feel like it is so hard to politically game out. You know, you want to have something that makes sense, that doesn't put a hole in our budget, that is something we feel like will then have voters pass it when it gets to the ballot. And I feel like, for me, one thing that I think is a real selling point is that we continue to hear, as tourism continues to be a major issue in our community, we get a lot of public feedback on it, that not everybody feels like they benefit directly financially. And so I feel like this is a way of saying, yes, we have a lot of tourists, and also, isn't it nice, we have the tourists, they pay the sales tax, we get to pay less tax in the winter. And then to speak to food and utilities for a second, of course, yeah, we have millionaires in Juneau, you could means test things to death, but at the end of the day, when someone's paying their grocery bill and their utility bills, those are just the real cost of living expenses. That's what it costs to exist in the community. And so from that perspective, that to me is so tied into that assembly goal that was just referenced earlier about keeping cost of living low, that, you know, my rent has gone up, I'm sure. People's mortgages have gone up. You know, there's lots of other things that we have less control over. So if we can put a little bit of a finger on the scale to say, you know, the things that you need to exist, we're going to not collect sales tax on it. So those are my only additional comments.
Mr. Steininger.
I guess since I've talked a lot, because I read a whole 2 pages to everybody, I won't add too much more, just to say that, you know, when we came into the discussion on the actual rates themselves, I went into that thought process wanting a smaller swing. Because of that, you know, I didn't want a large uptick in the winter, but I wanted to make sure that there was enough of a, you know, downward move in the tax or a large uptick in summer, I guess, enough of a downward drop in the tax in the winter for people to see the benefit of this, for people that kind of psychologically feel like, yeah, this is a benefit. I get a lower tax rate here, and then the higher tax rate is, to bring money in from outside the town. And I wanted to see a smaller swing, but as we ran the numbers with Director Flick and looking at what you could collect at each different tax amount, and we limited ourselves kind of to the half and whole percents to make it easier to calculate, because I lived somewhere with a 7.75% tax for a while, and it's impossible to do in your head. But as we worked through that exercise, in order to make sure we were collecting at least the same amount of tax, and it does land with a little bit more, you did end up having to have this bigger swing. And that's, while my desire was a smaller swing, and I really would love to see if somebody could come back with a proposal that gets you to a smaller swing, that still meets a lot of those needs, I think I'd be supportive of it. It just wasn't quite able to land there in the modeling, but I think everybody should sit down with Director Flick, and I'll volunteer all of her time to working with you guys on it, and run through some of those scenarios, because we have a lot of time to have this discussion, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I think the reason why I proposed the 2%, it was a lot of the reasons that Mr. Bryson mentioned. I think for one thing, we don't know, we haven't modeled out how the spending habits have changed. And we also haven't really, I'm also trying to think of who the different people who would support and oppose this are. I do appreciate, dropping it down to 3.5 might persuade some people, but maybe raising it up to 7.5 in the summer might dissuade others. I think I do like that from that proposal, and maybe I can get behind it, but what I like is that it does end up collecting more of a burden, I think, from the tourism community. But I think also my proposal collects the exact same amount in net extra revenue. I think this would be easier for businesses to get behind and support. And I also purposely had in mind that I wanted to have something less than a 5%, because I felt like that would also persuade people to vote for it as well. But I can also see how a 3.5%. I just think that it's probably easier for more voters to get. Yeah, so I think it's more predictable, and I think there might be less opposition in some circles to a 4.75, 6.75 sales tax.
Mr. Bryson, please keep your comments brief if you can.
I'll try, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that out of all the things that have been proposed for us, the example or the option 3 that Mr. Kelly just mentioned does allow for food and utilities to be exempted, and it keeps the winter to summer gap only at 2 percentage points. To me, that accomplishes what the group is trying to accomplish, removing sales tax from food and utilities. And if we could achieve that, I would applaud you guys. That would be amazing. This 4.75, 6.75, that would be the absolute limits that I would feel comfortable with as a business owner, that I could still support that. If we got bigger than a 2% gap between summer and winter, I think the consequences would be too drastic for the business community, and I think we'd have a significantly harder time getting it passed. So thank you for that extra time, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kelly, for option 3.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one of the proposers of the, I don't know what to call this, the HSS proposal, to make us a motion to, Mayor Weldon.
Do we have a 2-minute?
Yes.
Thanks.
bring us back here. Mr. Smith, will you get us started with the motion?
Yes, Madam Chair, I will give it a shot. I would move that the Assembly Finance Committee move for introduction an ordinance following the principles of the Hughes, Scandy, Smith, Steininger sales tax proposal for introduction on the June 9th regular assembly meeting, to be followed by and then be referred back to the Finance Committee for July 9th for additional work, questions, potentially public comment. And then that would give us time to move it back to the Assembly for July 28th, which is the last meeting we can move it. So moving us forward from the Assembly Finance Committee for introduction on June 9th, additional hearing at the July Finance, and an additional hearing at the July Finance Committee.
Staff, any concerns about that motion or timeline?
Chair Wall, we'll need to work with law to get an appropriate ordinance drafted, but we should be able to do that. We've got a couple weeks, so.
All right, any objections to that, Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. I guess this might be a question for staff. I was kind of interested in, I can kind of see us kind of coalescing around numbers now, and maybe we're pretty decisive about that. But, you know, July is quite a ways away. Is there a way that we can keep the title of the ordinance flexible enough so that if there is any movement, the Assembly could change its mind on the rates?
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. We can work with law to make the ordinance title generic enough, hopefully, that it will allow the body to set the numbers within the ordinance so it's not, so the title's not bearing the percentage rates. We will have to work with law to make sure that that's kosher, but we'll take that as direction.
Thank you. I'll remove my objection.
Mayor Weldon.
Appreciate that, Mr. Kelly, but that was why I took the at ease, because it's hard to move something this substantial forward if we're tied into something already, but we will look forward to the community discussion.
All right, any objections? Seeing none, that is so moved. Great, that brings us to information only. Nope, that brings us to next meeting date. And then we do have some supplemental materials, at least, well, one that's going to require some discussion for us here briefly. Next meeting date is listed here as June 4th, 2025. Based on this conversation, I am going to go ahead and cancel that meeting. We will get a break. Good job getting, June 4th is canceled. So our next Assembly Finance Committee meeting will be July 9th. Where will we be talking about seasonal sales tax? So there is one item on the supplemental materials, which is a school bond ordinance. The motion that we made, which I think I made not specifically enough, was just for the staff to prepare that ordinance, knowing that we have some things to figure out before we decide whether we're putting that on the ballot. But we need to get it moving, just like the seasonal sales tax, actually introduced to be able to make that final decision before our last date. So I was going to go to the mayor for a motion to get us there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move an ordinance a general obligation bond ordinance to the full assembly with an amendment.
Go ahead with the amendment.
So my amendment would increase the $10 million to 10,730, sorry, got everybody excited. $10,735,000. And what I'm doing with this is I'm finding funding for the Zontakini playground in a bond rather than from our general fund.
That would be up to, right? So we could make,
Cool.
that would allow us the conversation. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Object for a question to staff. Do we know how far this would set back the new playground schedule if we had to wait until a bond was passed?
I believe that you funded it in your budget, so we would still be, you didn't fund this, oh geez, thank God Angie's here. Well, I suppose, so the question is how far would it set back if we don't have funding to do the project?
My question is, if we had to wait for a bond to pass, how far would that set the project back?
Right, we would design in probably, November, December, unless the assembly appropriated different funding source to continue design and attempt to be prepared in next construction season.
Follow-up? And how would that compare to if we paid for it in general fund?
I think it would all depend on when that appropriation is made, but either way, we're not going to be able to meet this construction season. So regardless of the timing of that, the earliest we could construct would be next construction season.
Ms. Yusianese, then Mr. Steininger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a funding question, but now that raises another question. With the way that these are structured and all the special rules that go with them, apologies if this is a dumb question. If it made a difference when we appropriated funds, is it permissible to do something like, say, we're going to fund this with general funds and then pay ourselves back with bond proceeds, or is that a weird double dip around the voters?
Good question, Ms. Yuskianis. We would need to work with bond counsel on the limits within which that could be done. Typically, if it's within a few months, that's not a big deal, but if there were to be an appropriation, say, on your June 9th via a transfer, and then the bond election doesn't happen until October, and then it's probably, it'll be close to a year before cash comes in to fund it. We'd have to just make sure that that's okay with bond legal. I don't have that specific answer today, but I assume that it could be written to cover that.
Okay, thank you. Can I have a quick follow-up? So am I understanding you correctly, Manager Custer, that this being on our pending list, or it was on our pending list, it's had different things now. So that was never going to make this construction season?
You are correct.
Okay, thank you.
Steininger, then Mr. Kelly.
Ms. Hughes Candies asked the exact two questions I had.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. What I don't feel clear about is, like, even if we wouldn't be able to start, regardless, we won't be able to start this construction season. But I'm wondering, like, are we still going to be delayed? Like, is it going to be 2 years instead of 1 year before we start construction? I think there's a lot of parents who've kind of brought that issue up. So it's really important to me to know, my vote on this is going to depend on whether or not there is going to be a time difference on this.
Yeah, so if we don't know of funding until October, we still have 6 months to do design, and recall that the project is just site preparation, so it's, you know, not as extensive of a design project as a full playground would be. So there's still that component of the actual playground equipment that we would not be designing during that period. But you know, it should be enough period for that. It's a relatively simple design project.
Thank you. So it sounds like regardless of what the funding source is, whether it's general fund or bonds, it would go forward with design in the later part of this calendar year and likely would start in next summer. Thank you.
And Mr. Kelly, if it's helpful, the body already voted to not take up this issue until we consider the bond. And so the mayor's motion just allows for, when we have that discussion, potentially putting it in the bond. So there's no decision we can make tonight that's going to make that playground happen any faster. It's my understanding. Ms. Hall.
And if the bond fails, does that mean, yeah. Oh. You know, I guess I'm wondering, is there a way to fund it? You know, I think it's important that we fund this project, period. And if it's a little riskier by having it go into a bond, then that's a concern.
Ms. Hall, I'll just for clarity for everyone, my intent is not to have this conversation tonight about whether to put it on the bond or not, because we have time set for that when we talk about the bond. Right now, we're just trying to make sure that if this body chooses to put it on the bond, that they can. I'm sorry if that's not, I know that's confusing, but hopefully that's helpful. Is that helpful? Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I think you're helping to clear things up for me. So I just want to make sure, because like the mayor's motion was to increase the bond amount. So then if we don't put that on, like, I guess what flexibility, like, will we not have the flexibility to just do that when we're introducing it, or, I mean?
So my understanding, there are 5 people on this, of these 9 people said, we don't want to put it in the budget. We want to talk about it when we talk about the bond. And so my understanding is when we talk about the bond, let's say we don't put the school bond on the ballot, we could say appropriate money to fund this playground. Or we could say we're not putting it on and we're not appropriating money, or we're putting it in the bond and seeing what the voters do. And if the voters don't pass it, we can appropriate money. So lots of choices, but I don't think we have to make those choices tonight. And I think 5 people already, and I was in the minority, so I'm not trying to get in my way. I'm just saying 5 people already voted to move this conversation to the time that we talk about whether we want to put the bond on the ballot or not.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure we're not tying our hands. Thank you.
Anything, am I right? Sorry. Yes, okay, I see head nodding. Other questions or any objections to the motion? Okay, that's so moved. Mr. Smith. Wait. Oh, that was the amendment. Yep, all right. Any objections to the amendment to increase the amount that we may put on the ballot by the amount that was flagged for the school playground? Seeing none, that brings us back to the original motion. Any objections to the original motion? Seeing none, that's so moved. Sorry, I'm sorry that was confusing. It was a result of my bad motion to begin with, and I tried to fix it. Not well. I think that brings us to adjournment. Mr. Smith.
That's a rough segue for me here. So, because of Open Meetings Act, I've only been able to talk to a couple people about this, so I want to broach an idea to the body. This is regarding utility rates and possible bonds for the utility. At the last finance meeting, I heard and I agree that even with these 5% rate increases, there still likely needs to be additional investment into the utilities. I've run some numbers. I haven't gotten the perfect one, but I had also heard from another member, and I'm not sure where the rest of the body is, on potentially increasing the rates for the first year more than the 5%. Because, with the 5%, I think we're still needing to borrow money from the SRF and then fund from other sources to the tune of, I want to say, about 17 million bucks. So my proposal, and bringing it to the body to see what y'all think, is to introduce a GEO bond. I'm going to put a number of up to $7.5 million, the passage of which would reduce utility rates potentially in the first year, essentially. So the ultimate plan for me would be we adjust the utility rates ordinance to have a higher first year increase because we know we need more funds into that utility. And then we have a GEO bond before the voters to say, if you pass this GEO bond, it would reduce the first year rate, or it would reduce some rate, so that you can either pay it for the GEO bond or you pay it through the rates, but the voters have a choice on if they want to pay it with the GEO bond.
Mr. Smith, did you check if this is in order, given that we did already, I believe, make that motion and debate it?
We made a motion for 10 million, but thankfully there's so many other numbers in the world.
Okay, I was just asking. I saw a bunch of hands. I think I saw Miss Atkinson first. Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I've said a lot that I'm a fan of doing a bond for utilities this year. I do worry a little bit about the contingency. Well, first off, I am against raising the first year rates, so I'll start there. But I worry that we're talking about putting a lot of really complex moving pieces questions on the ballot. And so that would be my one hesitancy on that front. I don't necessarily hate the idea of saying like, oh, you can lower your rates with this, but my preference would be just to have it be a straight bond.
I'm going to ask another in order question here, not because I'm trying to be squirrely, but this wasn't on the agenda. I think we can amend the agenda, maybe. I don't know. Or if we're able to take motions off the agenda in a committee meeting, I just don't know.
Sure.
Mr. Barr.
Madam Chair, our best guest over here, I think we might have attorneys listening who can correct us if we're wrong, is it is at the discretion of the chair, and if the body wishes to overrule the chair, they may do so with 5 votes.
I'm a consensus builder. I like to keep people happy. I would ask that we did vote on this. If there's someone who has changed their mind, then please speak up early so we know how much time we want to spend on this. Ms. Atkinson spoke. I had Mayor Weldon, and then I see your hand, Mr. Kelly. It said Mayor Weldon.
So I'll object for a purpose of a question. First of all, before I ask my question, I would say I would support looking at one because again, we're not making that decision tonight. We're just moving something to the assembly so we can make the decision later. But correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a minute since I read that utility memo, Madam Manager, but I think a $7.5 million bond isn't enough to lower the rates. I think it just, because I believe you had debt plus the 5%. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so if we believe the assumption of the lowest cost of CIP funding that was presented by the consultants, if we assume that's what we want to fund to, 5% increase a year requires an injection of $10 million of non-utility rate revenue starting in year 2028, and requires, I don't remember off the top of my head, but less than 10 million, but around that number of borrowing from the SRF fund, which means we're just putting those costs off to future ratepayers. So the ordinance that we're introducing to you has those whereas clauses built in it, right? So that when I come back to you in 2028 and ask for sales tax funds, it has that precedent set against it. Earlier in the conversation about the first bond that you passed, we talked about it, so the bond that's already passed and appropriated, we talked about $10 million buying the rate increase down by 3%. So I'm sure it's slightly different than that, but I think that's a good round number to think in your head when you're like, how much non-utility revenue can we inject into the utility to buy down rates?
Follow up?
Quick follow-up. Thank you for that, Madam Manager. Mr. Smith, are you looking at the first year being higher because if the seasonal sales tax pass, you basically have a 5% gift from no sales tax? Is that what you're looking at? Or?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That is definitely a benefit. The other is by having a larger increase at the beginning, it then raises the bar, so you'll capture more revenue throughout the life of the rates. And again, we know the systems need investment, but yes, and another reason as well. Thanks.
Mr. Kelly, then Ms. Hughes Gandes.
Thank you. I think I have something of just a little point of order about this, is that we didn't really come prepared to discuss this. I think there's a reason why things need to be noticed. We can't just add things to the agenda because both the public and the assembly need to be able to be prepared to have these discussions. I think what would be more appropriate would be to give license to Mr. Smith to work on this, or to maybe bring it back up as an agenda item on a future agenda.
Mr. Smith, did you actually make a motion? I'm sorry if I forgot.
No.
I would like to move this along, so if you could make a motion, then we can decide whether we're going to, how we're going to move forward, and people can continue to discuss, but that would be helpful.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move that the Assembly Finance Committee direct staff to introduce a GEO-bond ordinance for the wastewater and water utilities in the amount of $8 million. Up to $8 million. And I can fiddle with contingency stuff and that kind of things in the future. But anyway, we'll start with that.
Objections? Ms. Hughes Gandes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll object just to weigh in, I guess. I wasn't here at that meeting, so for me, I don't know who were in one for and who were in the other for, and I was 4-4, and I don't know who was who. And I don't know what your ultimate reasoning was. I know you also just talked about the school bonds, which we looked at tonight. I think for me, I am very concerned that we didn't raise the utility rate enough. And I know it sounds like I am just not sensitive to rates here tonight, but it is not enough. And so I'm on the one hand into the idea of that. And then on the other hand, I'm very excited about this seasonal sales tax proposal. And I just wonder how much the voter can be expected to, you know, like we said, you're always kind of trying to guess what will they vote for, what will Juneau support. And I'm not sure having a school bond and a utility bond the year after we had a utility bond, and then this assembly sets the taxes artificially, or not the taxes, the rates artificially low. I mean, I think this is the one where I'm like, we're gonna pay for it in the future, and then you're gonna have to raise your rates 20%, and none of us will be here, or maybe some of us will be here, and it's gonna suck. But I think for that reason, I'm a no. But all of that to say is, I'm sorry I don't have more of a background, and I do appreciate what you're trying to do here. I do think we need to get more money, but maybe it's a next year thing.
And as a reminder, the vote tonight is just whether to introduce it. I would say if that is the will of the body to introduce it, then we would send it back to the Finance Committee meeting on July 9th. So you don't need to debate all of, if you're on the fence and want to this is to keep it on the table. So we voted to take it off the table. This would keep it on the table and keep it in the discussion. I think I have Mr. Steininger next.
Again, Miss Alicia Hughes-Gandy's just covered a lot of what I was going to say. On the same wavelengths tonight. I voted against the bond package, or I voted to take it off the table the last time for a lot of the reasons that were brought up. You know, we just had a utility bond package, we're raising the rates. And I also am concerned that we're not raising the rates enough, and we're just kind of borrowing from the future here. But I'm willing to put it back on the table for more consideration over looking at that rate structure. If this is the compromise necessary to, in my mind, rectify a little bit of that rate structure and ensure that we're maybe setting rates that don't borrow as much from the future, that kind of get us closer to where we need to be, you know, I might be willing to have that conversation, but I do really worry about putting too many things on the ballot.
Did I miss someone? Mayor Weldon.
I fully agree with both Ms. Hughes-Gandy's and Mr. Steininger, but I think it needs a chance to move forward before we squash it. I think it still has some life.
I'll object. I feel like if we're gonna put something forward, we go all in. I felt like we winnowed down the list. I still don't, I'm still thinking only one thing on the ballot. So the less options we're putting out there in the public for discussion, the better for me. But if this does pass, I would love to be in the conversation of which of these come first in when we ultimately vote on it. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I completely hear, and I'm again, this is, the conversations we can have and we don't have outside of this room because we adhere to the Open Meetings Act and talk to two people about something. So I appreciate the feedback and thoughts and perspective, and it's all very valid, and I share some of those similar concerns. I guess I am just like, we know we need to infuse money into that utility. The rates do not seem to be quite high enough. Is this an opportunity to say, folks, we know we need to put money in here. Here's a different way to do it. Give people an option, but I hear the concern about having too much on there and sinking things. But I'd like maybe let's just put it out there, and then we can hear more about it, and then we can know what we're looking at and what really should go in the basket and what should get pulled out. So that's why I'd ask for a supportive vote on this. But who knows? I'm not going to say what I was going to say. So I appreciate the consideration but understand the perspectives as well. Thank you.
We have a motion and we have objection. Ms. Wendell, will you call roll? Repeat the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Wall. On the motion to direct staff to introduce a general obligation bond ordinance for water and wastewater utilities in the amount of up to $8 million. Assemblymember Smith.
Yes.
Assemblymember Hughes Scandies.
No.
Assemblymember Kelly.
Yes.
Assemblymember Hall.
Yes.
Assemblymember Atkinson.
No.
Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Assemblymember Bryson.
No.
Assemblymember Steininger.
Yes.
Chair Wall.
No.
Motion passes 5 ayes, 4 nays.
I think that brings adjournment, and if you raise your hand, I will not call on you. I never know what's going to come out otherwise.
Thank you for doing such a good job again, guiding us through the budgetary process. We made it through all the hard piece and you killed it. And thank you to staff too. Yeah.
We're adjourned.